This video presentation will be discussing a mental health counseling theory known as ontological hermeneutics. Many people in the mental health field are not even aware that this is a theory by which they can practice counseling, and some who are aware of it mistakenly believe that it is merely a philosophy and are unaware of the ways in which it is used as a counseling modality. This presentation is designed to be a very brief and minimalistic explanation of the counseling theory. And it will be reviewing the definition of the theory, identifying key figures and their contributions to it, and introducing the counseling approach. Hermeneutics is a philosophy that is concerned with the art and theory of interpretation. In particular, what it means to be human and how human understanding is possible. In other words, if we want to know how people think, act, and experience their lives, it is necessary first to have some notion of what it is that acts, thinks, and has experiences. So how does hermeneutics correlate to other counseling theories? Well, all psychological inquiry must be faithful to human nature. In fact, all personality theories attempt to define what human nature is, explain what it means to be human, and what conditions make it possible. But, just like hermeneutics, all these theories are matters of interpretation. This means that all counseling theories are based on and even determined by their respective counseling theories. Hermeneutics does the same thing. It has a theory of human nature that determines its counseling approach. One of the first key figures responsible for applying this philosophy to the human sciences was a man named Willem Dilthey, and he theorized about how human understanding was possible. He wanted to know how human beings come to know what they know. Next came Martin Heidegger, who theorized about what it means to be human at all. He wanted to know what the mode of the being is who understands. Hans-Georg Gadamer talked about how historical culture and tradition can add contextual truth to our interpretations of human nature. He also addressed the concept of fusions of horizons, which is the idea that who we are and what we know fuses with who the client is and what they know. This will be addressed later in the presentation. Mikhail Bakhtin talked about how people are authors of themselves and that their inner dialogue unveils itself in narrative form. He also theorized about how dialogue, or in this case inner dialogue, is how people come to know who they are. More recently, Paul Ricoeur, one of the most famous psychologists in Europe and here in America, began the process of refining hermeneutics as a counseling theory. Charles Taylor elaborated on many of the ideas proposed by Heidegger regarding how individuals learn about themselves. He introduced concepts such as the dialogical self, which is the idea that human beings learn about who they are through their relationships and conversations with others. Ethical space, which is the idea that human beings learn about who they are when determining where they stand on matters of right and wrong. And radical reflexivity, which is the idea that human beings are constantly interpreting themselves. Jack Martin and Jeff Sugarman theorized about human possibility and constraint. For them, the factors that make up who we are as human beings will always serve as both the means for possibility and constraint as human beings live their lives. Brent D. Slife elaborated on the counseling theory by talking about how who we are as human beings is always in relation to other human beings and our physical world around us, and that when we are interpreting human nature, we cannot remove the context of our world around us. As a counseling approach, hermeneutics is a dialogical process that closely resembles relational and humanistic counseling. It is a philosophy of relating to another person. It is not a structured modality of assuming the client is broken and needs fixing. And when we relate to them, we are fusing horizons with them, as Gadamer suggested. Fusing horizons means who we are and what we know is fusing with who the client is and what the client knows, so that both client and counselor can work together toward finding meaningful interpretations. This concept of the fusion of horizons is really just another way of saying that the counselor must always be trying to meet the client where the client is at, so that the two of them may work together, and so that the counselor may provide reinterpretation that is both understandable and agreeable to the client. It is through this narrative dialogue that who the client is, what they have experienced, and their self-interpretations begin to reveal themselves and provide the catalyst for any necessary reinterpretation. The whole process of ontological hermeneutics counseling is very similar to martial arts. In martial arts, a trainer takes a trainee and teaches them how to defend themselves based on who the trainee is and what they are capable of. A hermeneutics counselor does something very similar by helping the client learn how to live a meaningful life based on who the client is and what they are capable of. So with the overview in mind, let's move on to some of the basics of hermeneutic counseling. The first is the fundamental interrelatedness of the counselor and the client. What this means is that the counselor should always be focused on the relationship they have with the client. One of the reasons for this is because the kinds of relationships that heal are the ones that are compassionate and empathic and empower the individual. The second basic is an attitude of openness, meaning the counselor is always allowing what the client says to matter to them. Third, the counselor is always looking for new ways to offer perspective about the client and their experiences. And when offering those perspectives, it is important for the counselor to remember that they are not experts on human nature. They are philosophers who are merely providing counsel for another individual. Next, I want to move on to a few other concepts of hermeneutic counseling. But I want to point out that these things are not necessarily techniques or modalities that are employed, but rather they are mindsets that the therapist should keep in mind while conversing with and interpreting the client. The first is the hermeneutic circle, which we mostly owe to Gadamer. The overall goal of the hermeneutic circle is to uncover contextual truth about the clients and their experiences. However, it is important to remember that this process is not circular, it's more contextual. As interpreters, we are constantly trying to bring in more context about the client and their experiences, because as we do this, interpretations and perspectives become more clear. Now, there is a whole lot more to the hermeneutic circle, but for the purposes of this quasi-presentation, what I have said so far will suffice. Another mindset that the therapist wants to remember when providing counsel is the idea of authenticity, which is the term Heidegger uses to describe our average everydayness. It is not just being honest and genuine, neither does it follow the romantic ideals of getting in touch with our inner selves. But rather for Heidegger, authenticity is a richer, fuller sense of participating with others. It is being who we really are. It is also characterized by cumulativeness and direction. And what that means is that it is a relationship that is characterized by more than just living in the moment. Part of the reason why we want a relationship that is characterized by more than just living in the moment is because of Heidegger's term historicity, which according to him is the unfolding of a person's life over time. Present experiences are always influenced by the past and the future. A person is always looking to the future and calling on the past to determine how to act in the present. To focus on just the present of the client would be to remove them from the context of their past and their foreseeable future, which is not something we want to do in hermeneutics counseling. We always want to be keeping the client in context, not just in the context of their lives, but also the context of time, the fact that our lives unfold over time. That is not to say that the present is not equally important, because it is in the present that the client is always interpreting himself and making decisions. We just always want to be understanding those interpretations and decisions in the context of both their past and their future. Overall, As I mentioned before, hermeneutics is a philosophy of relating to another person. It is not a structured modality of fixing a client. Although it is drastically different than more mainstream approaches such as psychoanalysis, REBT, CBT, etc., ontological hermeneutics provides opportunities for discourse and understanding that these other modalities may not permit. But the true value to this theory, in my opinion, is the way in which it approaches the client, which is unlike any other modality I have studied. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. If you are a counselor or a prospective counselor, I really encourage you to take the time to look more into this theory by looking at some of the resources down below which I have used in this presentation. By way of suggestion, a good place to start would either be the book Thinking Critically About Psychology, or the book Critical Issues in Psychotherapy, or the book Re-envisioning Psychology, all three of which are listed in the resources below.